Alright guys, so this is an absolutely wild story that just dropped from the New York Times, basically outlining how the government of Israel has been running a PSYOP against US lawmakers to try to influence them to send more weapons to Israel and just broadly to support their ongoing genocide in Gaza. So here's the headline: Israel secretly targets US lawmakers with influence campaign on Gaza war. So let's go ahead and get into some of the details here. It just gets more and more insane as we go on. They say Israel organized and paid for an influence campaign last year targeting US lawmakers and the American public with pro-Israel messaging as it aimed to foster support for its actions in the war with Gaza, according to officials involved in the effort and documents related to the operation. The covert campaign was commissioned by Israel's Ministry of Diaspora Affairs, a government body that connects Jews around the world with the state of Israel, according to 4 Israeli officials. The ministry allocated $2 million to the operation and hired this company Stoic, a political marketing firm in Tel Aviv, to carry out the plan. The campaign began in October, obviously right after October 7th, and remains active on the platform X, or Twitter. So this is still going on. This isn't even just, oh, this happened years and years and years ago and isn't that so crazy? This is shit that's still going on since October 7th. They've been running this PSYOP. They say at its peak, it used hundreds of fake accounts that posed as real Americans on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram to post pro-Israel comments. The accounts focused on U.S. lawmakers, particularly ones who are black and Democrats, such as Representative Hakeem Jeffries, the House Minority Leader from New York, and Senator Raphael Warnock from my home state of Georgia, with posts urging them to continue funding Israel's military. So, you know, with a guy like Hakeem Jeffries, okay, they also go on to mention Richie Torres in this article as well. These guys are completely bought and paid for, okay, when it comes to lobbying groups like AIPAC. Like, these guys are already the biggest cheerleaders for Israel, so I'm not sure if like a couple different comments in their replies on Twitter or Facebook or Instagram are going to sway them one way or another. They're going to, you know, be in favor of sending billions of dollars in weaponry to Israel, regardless of this kind of an operation going on. But it is notable in the sense that, you know, there are potentially hundreds of accounts that are out there that are basically warping the conversations that are supposed to be happening here in the United States in a pro-Israel direction, right? So I guess these are some of the people who have been showing up in my replies on Twitter maybe. They say ChatGPT, the artificial intelligence-powered chatbot, was used to generate many of the posts. They're using AI. They can't even write it out themselves, really. I mean, we're talking about a couple hundred here. You couldn't have just, you know, had a couple people do that. You had to go and use ChatGPT to cheat. They say the campaign also created 3 fake English language news sites featuring pro-Israel articles. And we'll get back to a little bit more on that here in a second. They say the secretive campaign signals the lengths that Israel was willing to go to sway American public opinion on the war in Gaza. The United States has long been one of Israel's staunchest allies, with President Biden recently signaling a $15 billion military aid package for the country, which is, it's really amazing, right? We're the wealthiest country on the face of the planet. Somehow we can't afford healthcare. Somehow we can't afford to build, you know, high quality public housing and to address the housing crisis in this country. We can't afford to tackle climate change or anything like that, but we can definitely afford to just pull $15 billion out of our ass to go and send to this country, this apartheid state in the midst of committing a genocide in our name, right? And they say the conflict has been unpopular with many Americans. Oh, you don't say. Who have called for Mr. Biden to withdraw support for Israel in the face of mounting civilian deaths in Gaza. And guys, this has been the case for months at this point. Okay, for months, the American people have overwhelmingly supported an immediate ceasefire, a permanent ceasefire. For months, the American people have been against Israel's actions in Gaza. They have wanted the United States to stop sending weapons to Israel to use on the Palestinian people in Gaza. So, I mean, the polling on this has been overwhelmingly lopsided in favor of being critical towards Israel and skeptical of U.S. policy when it comes to Israel. And yet there's been effectively zero change in policy. And this is under a Democratic administration. Now, don't get me wrong, if Trump was in power right now, he'd be doing everything that Biden is doing. He just wouldn't be having the flowery language about pretending to care about Palestinian civilians. But, you know, it is just absurd that we've gotten to this point, right? I mean, it's a lovely democracy that we have here in the United States, where the American people, regardless of whether it's this issue or any other issue, can be overwhelmingly on one side. And our politicians just could not give a single solitary shit what the American people actually think about this. And it's also amazing because with the polling data being that overwhelmingly critical of Israel amongst the American people, we're talking about that being the case with overwhelming propaganda in the opposite direction, right? With these hundreds of accounts on social media that are trying to influence the American people to be firmly pro-Israel, to give them billions of dollars in weapons to do whatever the fuck they want in Gaza, you know? And it's not just that, it's obviously the influence of AIPAC, the influence of the mainstream media that is overwhelmingly dishonest and pro-Israel, right? And even with all of those factors, the American people are still fed up with this shit. They still think that what Israel is doing is unacceptable, and they still think that Joe Biden is fully complicit in it, right? I mean, think about how low you have to go to get to that point, how egregious Israel's actions have to be in order for the American people to get beyond that overwhelming propaganda and to see through the bullshit, right? Now they continue here with some other crazy aspects of this article. They say the operation began just weeks into the war in October, according to Israeli officials and the documents on the effort. Dozens of Israeli tech startups received emails and WhatsApp messages that month inviting them to join urgent meetings to become, quote, digital soldiers for Israel during the war, according to the messages viewed by the Times. Some of the emails and messages were sent from Israeli government officials, while others came from the tech startups and incubators. Many of the campaign's fake accounts on X, Instagram, and Facebook posed as fictional American students, concerned citizens, and local constituents. The accounts shared articles and statistics that backed Israel's position on the war. So, I mean, they're not even just like fake accounts or bots that are like, hey, I'm an Israeli, you should support us. They're posing as Americans. They are pretending to be American students on college campuses or, you know, these other things, local constituents and concerned American citizens, right? I mean, that just takes it to an entirely different level. They say some of the fake accounts responded to posts by Mr. Richie Torres on X by commenting on anti-Semitism on college campuses and in major U.S. cities. So you're posing as a fake American student and then running around and talking about how anti-Semitic these protests are on college campuses. Bitch, you're not even in the fucking country. You don't even live here. You're not at these protests. You're not an American student. You're a fucking like Chat GPT, you know, Israeli PSYOP. That's what you are. Talking about anti-Semitism on college campuses. Now, again, it's not just like these accounts that are pushing that kind of a narrative. The fucking Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, got in front of a camera and basically did a comparison between the protests on college campuses against Israel's genocide in Gaza and compared that to the fucking Nazis. To the Nazis. I mean, that's the lengths that they will go. The audacity of the Prime Minister of Israel, who Joe Biden has given everything, to get in front of a camera and to lie about and to smear young American college students for daring to question his genocidal actions. I mean, think about the audacity of that man. And of course, we also have our Congress in a bipartisan fashion that just recently invited him to come and speak to Congress. The same guy who's facing genocide charges potentially at the International Court of Justice, the same guy who's facing potential arrest warrants for war crimes by the International Criminal Court, that's the guy who's about to come and speak in front of our government. I mean, just absolutely insane. They continue. In response to a December 8th post on X by Mr. Torres about fire safety, one fake account replied, Hamas is perpetuating the conflict, referring to the Islamic militant group. The post included a hashtag that said Jews were being persecuted. The campaign also created 3 fake news sites with names like Non-Agenda. Non-Agenda is what you're calling the fake website that you're using to push a pro-Israel agenda. Non-Agenda. As well as Unfold magazine, which stole and rewrote material from outlets including CNN and the Wall Street Journal to promote Israel's stance during the war, according to fake reporters' analysis. First off, guys, listen, you don't really need to rewrite the coverage from CNN and the Wall Street Journal. They're kind of already doing Israeli propaganda on your behalf, but they took it, again, to another level, and they were stealing, they're basically plagiarizing, it looks like, from CNN and the Wall Street Journal, and then like rewriting the pieces slightly to be even more pro-Israel, and then releasing them on these fake American websites to pretend as if this is a legitimate news source, and then trying to spread that around on social media. They say the effort was sloppy, no shit. Profile pictures used in some accounts didn't match the fictional personas that they cultivated, and the language they used in posts was stilted. So they got a couple examples here. In at least 2 instances, accounts with profile photos of black men posted about being, quote, middle-aged Jewish women. You got a profile picture of a black guy, and then you're talking about your experience being a middle-aged Jewish woman. What are we doing here, guys? They say, on 118 posts in which the fake accounts shared pro-Israel articles, the same sentence appeared, quote, "I gotta reevaluate my opinions due to this new information." They say last week, Meta and OpenAI published reports attributing the influence campaign to Stoic. Meta said that it removed 510 Facebook accounts, 11 Facebook pages, 32 Instagram accounts, and 1 Facebook group tied to this operation. OpenAI said Stoic had created fictional personas and biographies meant to stand in for real people on social media services used in Israel, Canada, and the United States to post anti-Islamic messages. So they had to sprinkle in a little bit of racism in the mix here as well. And many of the posts, they say, remain on Twitter. So, you know, not really surprising that Elon Musk wouldn't really take the issue of Islamophobic posts that seriously, right? Or pro-Israel posts seriously. I mean, this is the same guy who was at one point actually floating the idea of banning people who refer to Israel as being a colonizing power, or he talked about banning people who use phrases like "from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free." So it doesn't surprise me in the slightest that it looks like Twitter is doing the least of any of these platforms to actually address this propaganda. But it also is pretty ironic, right? Because wasn't that one of the main things that Elon Musk said he was going to address? That was why he purchased Twitter in the first place, is, well, we got to get these bots under control. I guess if they're pro-Israel bots, then it doesn't really count, right? Now, you know, one of the first things that obviously comes into people's minds when you get this kind of a report that we just read from the New York Times there is, imagine if this was literally any other country, right? Because I'm sure that a vast majority of this story is basically just going to get swept under the rug. I doubt that you're going to see mainstream media outlets, you know, running this story, you know, in the primetime hours tonight. I doubt you're going to see a bunch of U.S. politicians coming out and, you know, screaming, you know, or ripping their hair out over this or something like that. So I think that this is going to be a passing story that nobody really talks about. But the big question is, like, imagine if this was any other country other than Israel. And it's a good thing we don't have to do that. Right? We don't have to imagine what would happen if this was any other country, because, as pointed out here by our boy Prem, imposing sanctions on actors supporting Kremlin-directed disinformation efforts. So, turns out, literally just 2 months ago, the US sanctioned Russians for creating false websites and then using bogus social media accounts to amplify the misleading content, similar to what the government of Israel just reportedly carried out. Will the US take similar action here? And I think we both know what the answer to that question is. No, of course we won't. You think we're going to sanction Israel over this? We won't even sanction Israel over maintaining a decades-long occupation and apartheid and ethnic cleansing and now a genocide. You think we're going to sanction them over, you know, running a little bit of a PSYOP on the American people and U.S. politicians? No, of course not. But I mean, again, it's just one more example here for everybody in terms of not only how far Israel will go to try to influence American politics, but also the brazen hypocrisy of the U.S. government, right? This is something that Democrats were, and honestly still are to this day, screaming about when it comes to Russia, right? This was one of the biggest narratives coming out for years, is Democrats saying the Russian government, Vladimir Putin, they are trying to influence U.S. elections, or they're trying to influence U.S. policy, okay, by using bot accounts and fake news outlets to propagandize the American people. This was like the biggest narrative over the last 6 years. Foreign influence on American democracy. And we're willing to sanction them for carrying out that kind of an operation. But then when it's Israel, what's going to happen? Does anybody seriously believe that there's going to be any meaningful response to this at all? No, of course not, because it's Israel. And Israel gets the Israel exception. They get treated as if they're the 51st state of this country. And honestly, it's even beyond that. I don't even think a single U.S. state could have the influence over the federal government that the government of Israel has over the U.S. government. I mean, it's absolutely insane. And I mean, this is just the surface level. This is the first reporting that I'm seeing about this kind of an operation, but I highly doubt this is anything new. I highly doubt this is the first time they've done something like this. And I highly doubt the details we just read in that story cover the full picture of what's actually going on here. And again, it may not be that important that you had a couple, hundred social media platforms or a couple hundred social media, accounts or bots or whatever the case may be that were posting things on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram. That may not have had the biggest influence, but again, it's just reaffirming our understanding of the lengths that Israel will go to influence U.S. politics, right? The biggest actors in this kind of an arena would be groups like AIPAC. Again, they don't even have to register as a foreign lobbying organization. I mean, how insane is that? Right? They are explicitly acting on behalf of what's in the best interest of Israel, a foreign government. They have the ability to lob hundreds of millions of dollars into U.S. elections, to bribe our politicians to do the bidding of a foreign government. And nobody has an issue with this. Nobody thinks that this is completely insane and deranged, and again, all in service of defending an ongoing genocide. Nobody thinks this is crazy. I think it's fucking crazy. I think it's fucking crazy. And I think the U.S. response to this should be basically exactly what we did to Russia, right? You can't say it's crazy when Russia does it, it's evil when Russia does it, but then when it's one of our allies, or when it's specifically Israel, then everything's totally fine.
Politic guy has the best politic. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me. Everyone is saying